My name's Meera Dattani. I live in London and I currently work as a travel journalist and travel editor. I was born in East London in Barking Hospital, and I grew up in Chadwell Heath, a small London town between Romford and Ilford in Essex. Both sets of grandparents migrated to East Africa first from India, from Gujarat, in different ways. And set up business and family life in Uganda, and in Kampala specifically by the end. And then, of course, in 1972, Idi Amin issued his decree for all Ugandan Asians to leave. And so that is why both sets of grandparents ended up settling in the UK. I know they were long journeys by sea at the time, so leaving from one of the Arabian seaports and then into Mombasa. I know on my father's side, my grandfather arrived first, because often that's what happened. You came over to work in a business, and then you would perhaps bring your family over. And I believe my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, who I never met, he died very young, also did the same. So my maternal grandmother also came over to Uganda a bit later. So what I know about that journey was just that it was long, but it was common. A lot of people from a lot of Gujaratis did go to East Africa because of British Empire and wanting to establish business and in their colonies. So there was a lot of movement.
Approximately, when was this?
My paternal grandfather came over in the 1930s, I believe. Yeah, that would make sense, because the eldest siblings were born in the early 1940s. So yeah, he came over around the 1930s, and then my grandmother would have followed after that. Obviously, after 72, when most Ugandan Asians had left, some had stayed because of different positions. And actually, my uncle, who ended up moving back to Uganda, he actually did stay in Uganda a little beyond that time, but not much longer, in 72. But when there were requests for Ugandan Asians to return, and there were promises that people could get their properties back, then I think in our family it was kind of encouraged that somebody go back and try and do that. So that's when my uncle first started considering moving back to Uganda. So sadly my uncle that uncle is not around anymore. But that's what I know, that he went back fairly early, and the family house didn't come back immediately, because when I went to visit I went for the first time in 1989, and it was my mum's first visit back since 72. And we didn't have the family house in 89, but my uncle, my aunt and my cousin had been living in Uganda for a number of years. So, and we saw the family house from across the road, and it was still occupied by the military. And I remember, because we tried to sneak a photo, which we did get, but they saw us and immediately raised the rifles, and we kind of raced away in our car. So I think the house actually came into ownership in the 90s. So, it took a bit of time.
To ask you a question about, obviously you probably didn't get a chance to talk to your grandparents or even your mum or your dad. This sense of belonging in Africa, did they feel that they belonged to Africa or they belonged to India?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they both have very different stories. So my dad actually was sent to boarding school when he was 12 here in Surrey. So he had his childhood in Uganda, but those, what I would class as your formative years, your teenage years, he was spending maybe just summers in Uganda, and maybe not even every summer. So my dad has much more affinity in a way with a lot of British culture, because he grew up here in a way. My mum and her family, my mum's side, they're much more connected to Uganda partly because the uncle that lived there is my mum's brother. And so there's a lot more talk about Uganda, a lot more kind of memory sharing, a lot more nostalgia. And I think because we've managed to keep that link through that family and being able to visit, it's a bit different. Whereas I don't want to speak for anybody, but on my dad's side, because my grandparents had to leave, well, in fact, they were in the UK holidaying in '72 when the decree was announced. So it was decided by the children really that it's better they didn't go back. So they'd effectively just left their property and their business like you would when you go on holiday here, and just never ever went back to it. So I think in a way there's a lot more, well, there's trauma on both sides, but I think the ways that people left were so different. So I don't know. I think it's really hard to say what they feel, but I think most of us feel everything. Like when my mum is in India, I feel that she feels so at home there. But then a lot of the talk is not about India when they're talking about the past, because she didn't grow up in India. So I think culturally, when you go to Gujarat especially, but just anywhere in India, you know that is where you're originally from, but your childhood memories are nothing to do with India. She didn't grow up in India, nothing. So then it's all Uganda. So it's a real mix, I think. So I work as a freelance travel journalist. I write for a variety of publications. I also am a travel editor on a publication called adventure.com. And then I do some sort of speaking and panels and run webinars and training for travel writers.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, now I want to ask you this question about how do other people see you in respect to your community? Do they call you foreign based on your skin color or your dress code or your views on society and politics or attitudes to family values? And do they see you as different to the majority of the population?
Okay, so
how other people perceive you?
Okay, so when you say other people, do you mean like anyone who's not Indian, basically? Yeah. I think that's a really hard question, because there are so many different types of people who are going to see me how they see me. So I honestly believe there are some people who, when I say they don't see colour, I think they either know me and they just don't view me as, you know, the Asian friend or the Indian friend. It's just way past that. Whereas there will be other people where that will be the first thing they see, which is fine because it's an obvious trait. So God, I think that's really hard, because there isn't like one way that other people who are, say, not Indians see me. I've definitely been made to feel, different or foreign in certain situations, but I wouldn't say that for me personally is the overriding experience that I have. Maybe because I kind of go through life not always through that lens, even though I'm very proud to be Indian and Ugandan and British and a woman, and brown coloured. Like, I like all those things, but I don't necessarily go through everything I do, through every feature I write or every interaction I have thinking that is who I am. Like, I'm just doing life, So, that's the reason I'm finding that really hard to answer, because if you said like how, specific situations maybe, yeah, I could say, but I don't know all the different people I meet, how they're really viewing me, what are they seeing.
Do you feel your background or your upbringing shaped you, and any challenges or struggles over the years settling in this country?
The years that I was growing up here, so late 70s into the 80s, and let's say I left for uni in like mid 90s, those years when my parents, were creating their lives here, I guess people didn't have like the friendship groups that you would organically have, like the way I have now from my childhood. Their friendship groups were really scattered, number one, and also very family based. So we did a lot, family was so big, especially when we were growing up. And so I feel culturally, the Gujarati side, the Indian traditions and customs and food and clothing and all of that were as big a part of my life as the sort of British influences. And I think I'm really grateful for that, because I genuinely look back on my childhood, and on one hand it's like going to Garba in the middle of November on cold nights at a local leisure centre. But on the other hand, I wasn't restricted, and I also remember all my pop posters on my wall. So I really feel that I had a chance to embrace both, and I wasn't forced. I didn't feel like I had to deny the Indian side, nor did I feel like I couldn't embrace the British side. So I do think that has shaped me, and that's why I feel quite comfortable here until somebody chooses to make me uncomfortable. And even then I feel I feel robust enough to counteract that to some degree,
So like you identify yourself as Indian first, or British Indian? It's a difficult one, isn't it?
I've used so many different things. I've often said British, Ugandan, Asian, British, Ugandan, Indian. I don't know why the British comes first. I don't think that's for any. I think it's because of how it sounds. Ugandan, Indian, British just doesn't end. Like, it doesn't seem natural, I guess. I definitely, I do see myself as, I know maybe it's cliched, all the usual things, but, like a child of sort of 3 continents, of, whether you want to call it children of empire, I don't know, but I definitely, I could never say, like, I feel out through and through English, I don't, but then I also don't feel through and through Indian, because when I go to India, which I love going to, I know I'm not Indian. I don't have the same cultural reference points as an Indian woman my age. I didn't grow up with those films, even though I know some of them. I didn't grow up with the same music, even though I know some of it. And Ugandan is a very different one, because actually I don't have a frame of reference for Ugandan pop culture, for example. But because all the stories that my parents told of their childhood were Uganda, I feel this kind of almost primal pull towards East Africa. So when I go to East Africa, even Kenya, because my partner's got Kenyan family, that's become a sort of second home, or third or fourth homeland, whatever. I feel a real pull to Africa, which is completely different to how I feel when I'm in India. So it's really interesting how all these things have fed in over the years.
Can I ask a question? You were just telling, when you still go to East Africa, how did you feel the relationship between the communities over there nowadays? Because the Indian are a small minority now, and there's a black majority, and of course there's some white people in Kenya. How do you feel is the atmosphere there? It's a personal question.
So how do I feel about it? So I know, obviously, when they were colonies, or when they were British protectorates, whatever, that obviously there were a lot of elites and hierarchies created, with indigenous, black people at the bottom. I feel very heartened when I see Ugandan and Kenyan, like black Ugandans and Kenyans, like really thriving and doing really well in whatever business they're in. I still feel uncomfortable about the way some communities and some people may speak to black Ugandans or Kenyans, and I don't like it, and where I see it I will try to call it out maybe. I also feel very uncomfortable about how much, especially I notice this more in Kenya, but sort of white owned like land, so the top sort of, because I work in travel, a lot of the top lodges and in beautiful conservancies and beautiful high up breezy places are still like white owned. I feel like that maybe has not been. I wish I had proper information on percentages and stuff, but I would assume it's really high in terms of. So I think the land, for me, the land side, the land aspect, and who owns land, and who's from that land, I still think there's a lot of problems there. So it's mixed. I mean, I definitely feel like people are doing better overall, but there still seems to be so many issues with poverty. And you know, I've done tours in areas that I feel just like in India. So I don't think everything has not been corrected, and you can feel that kind of hangover, you know, in a way of empire, because it really wasn't that long ago. When people say it was, oh, you know, get over it, was ages ago, you know, it really wasn't. It takes many generations to correct that kind of system.
Leads me nicely to my next question. I was going to ask you, is your attitude to the colonial past and teaching in schools, and how do you see that?
Yeah, I think I know there's been a lot of efforts, especially in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, you know, maybe longer, but in terms of in the public consciousness, let's say, to kind of bring more of that colonial conversation into, you know, history and geography and all the rest of it. And, you know, whether it was, you know, Black Lives Matter during the pandemic, you know, there's been various movements and things like that have, you know, National Trust doing its big colonial countryside sort of audit, you know, showing the other side of history. There's definitely been a big step, but then sometimes I get really disheartened when you see things that say, you know, oh, enough of this, or, you know, that happened, like I said before, you know, that happened then. And it's like, you know, that's not really how history works. And it's not, you know, when you hear rewriting history, it really annoys me. It makes me angry, because history's there to be constantly interpreted and looked at, and there isn't like one definitive interpretation, you know, you have to keep looking and learning. So yeah, I think there have been great strides made, but I also think because we haven't done it in a good gradual way of just always learning about it, now people feel like it's being, you know, shoved down their throats. So then you get this backlash, which is frustrating, because it didn't really need to be like this. So yeah, but I think it has to stay in the conversation forever, really, because it happened, and there will be no time when you shouldn't be learning about British Empire, for example. I studied history for 5 years and they never mentioned the word once. So I'd like to think that's changed since the 90s, in some modules anyway.
And you know, the present migration of Asians in this country, are there any parallels to the experiences of your parents and ancestors?
Not only the Asians, but any people who come in this country nowadays.
Oh, I see.
The migration debate. It's a big thing, you know?
Yeah, of course, huge. Yeah, I mean, you know, in the end, I think, I do think I'm going to speak for Britain, because, you know, it's where I live and I'm familiar with the kind of national kind of conversation. I do think there's a tendency to sort of think everybody just wants to come here because it's amazing here. And actually, you know, so many people are coming here because they have to. And, you know, when people say, you know, well, couldn't they have gone somewhere else? It's like, well, you know, at one point Britain ruled over a quarter of the world's population, so English has become the language that everybody speaks, and you tend to want to go somewhere where, you know, for work purposes, where you can actually work. And so, you know, in a way, you know, when you see the stories now, you know, people are coming because they are leaving, you know, quite desperate situations. And I'm not going to generalize, of course. At any moment in time, you're going to get people, you know, moving for all sorts of different reasons. But in terms of the big migration story, yeah, people are leaving because they either have to, like with Idi Amin, what happened with the Ugandan Asians, like they've literally been issued an order to go, or they're fleeing because there's civil war, in their country. And a lot of the times, not all the times, but, you know, that has been caused by, you know, previous events, some of which Britain or another colonial power may have played a part in. And I think because we don't understand all the layers of that and how they, you know, when you leave a country like Britain did in a lot of places, just like left, and you leave this power vacuum, then you create this system that, you know, whether it's military rule or whatever, like in Burma, or where you just leave people in a way it's not a good way to live, and there's gonna be civil war, and so people move. And yeah, there's a lot of parallels really when you really think about it.
What should change in the societies, what Rolf is after, and your personal future hopes? Are there fears or challenges for the future?
In terms of
your life in Britain here.
Okay.
It can be personal, but it can also be a look at the whole society, both, whatever you want to say.
Yeah. What should change?
Or your wishes, or your hopes, or your...
Yeah. Well, you know, I do think, you know, knowledge is power. So I think if there is a way for, you know, what's happened in the past, whether it's, you know, colonial history, you know, British history, you know, if there's a way for that to just be better known, be part of a national conversation without there being blame and things. You know, this just happened. You know, you didn't do it, but just learn about it and accept, you know, what happened. I do think that would lead to better understanding in society of, for example, why Britain is so multicultural. You know, there's a reason. You know, it's only sort of recent years with the Windrush scandal, for example, that people started to even realise about the ship called the ship and people coming over and being asked to come by Britain, you know, to help rebuild after the war. And, you know, I don't think a lot of people, there's still too many people who just don't understand how Britain has come to be how it is. And I think if they did, I do think you're not going to ever eliminate racism and prejudice completely, and that's just life. I do think there'd be a greater understanding of it, maybe even a greater pride, like even a feeling of like, yeah, this is so cool. We have all these different cultures and foods and everything here because this is how we were made. This is just how this country is made up. A bit like in the US, you know, there are some countries that are really shaped by many, many cultures, and others are a bit more homogenous, and neither is good, bad, whatever. It is how it is. And I really think that would help. I don't know do I feel hopeful? I don't know. It depends. If I go on Twitter, I feel completely disheartened because that seems to be where all the crazies hang out at the moment. But then, you know, you hear about, I don't know, I'll talk to a teacher friend and they'll be telling me about some lesson they've had and what the kids have been saying and how open-minded they are. And you think, you know, maybe the new generation is going to be a bit different. Or do we all kind of change at a certain age and start to become a bit more conservative? But I think I've read stuff recently where that's changing as well, you know, that people are not necessarily behaving differently as they get older. So I'd like to say that I'm hopeful, that I think things will be better. Yeah.
Do you call Britain your home?
Yeah, I do, definitely. I do, you know, when I'm away, there's many things about Britain that I crave and want to come back to. So yeah, but then I feel at home when I'm in Uganda and in India too. But I would definitely say that I do feel this is my home. And anyone, you know, I have been told to go back to where I come from, and I have told them that yes, I'm on the Piccadilly line back to Southgate, thanks. So, you know, I will not, you know, that is home for sure.